From Madison to Orange County, Corey Manske's journey was anything but ordinary. He left a steady newsroom career to dive headfirst into drum building, where mistakes became innovations and long hours produced iconic kits. His hands shaped instruments that ended up on festival stages, in music videos, and in the hands of drummers who defined a generation. This is the Fully Vented Podcast. Now here's your host, Jarrod Fallon.
So let's start with what is your full name, where are you from, and what dates did you work for O.C.D.P?
My name is Corey Manske. I'm originally from Madison, Wisconsin, and I worked at Orange County Drum from October of 2001 through like the summer of 04.
All right. Didn't know you were from, I thought you were originally from California or Arizona, but learned that one.
I moved to California from Arizona, but I'm originally from Wisconsin. Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. All right. So now we're moving on to these are going to be, like I said, the more rapid fire ones.
Got it.
So describe O.C.D.P in a few sentences.
O.C.D.P was such a vibe before that was a thing. It was definitely a place that was a little bit like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. When you got there, it was kind of like, it was amazing that small place with that small collection of dudes could produce that much amazing stuff.
Yeah. All right. Describe the music scene during your time at Orange County.
I would say that the music scene was very vibrant. And I would say, not coincidentally, a lot of the most popular drummers in that scene at that time were all Orange County artists, which made that scene seem even bigger and better to me.
Yeah, totally. Favorite band or drummer when you were working in Orange County?
I got turned on to Dredge when I worked there, and so I really fell in love with the playing of Dino from Dredge. But I also really liked John Otto from Limp Bizkit, and I really liked Chad Sexton from 311.
Right on. Briefly describe, I want you to close your eyes and think about this. Briefly describe the physical shop.
The physical shop was a little bit like being in a dream again. It was crazy to be in such a small place that was pretty basic. I'm not saying that in an offensive way, but like basic and small. I remember the first time I went there, I thought it was going to be some huge factory like DW or something like that. And I remember walking in going like, this is a garage, basically. So, I mean, it's like a storage unit. So it was very basic. And I think that probably enhanced its charm.
Yeah, totally. Describe John Machado.
Always one of my favorite questions. John Machado was an enigma. I don't think I ever saw him in anything other than short dolphin shorts and a sleeveless shirt. And what made that funny is he had the raddest mullet ever. And he drove, get this, a red Acura NSX. So when he pulled up to work, it was just like, it was very incongruous to see that dude hop out of that car. It was pretty hilarious.
Describe Daniel Jensen.
Daniel was one of my favorite guys working there because I always admired his drive. He was very, very driven, and he had really, really high standards. And I think that if you were to ask him, I'm sure that he believes that perfection does exist. Most people say perfection doesn't exist. In the eyes of Daniel, it absolutely exists, and he absolutely enforces it and wants everyone in that place to strive for perfection in every way.
Totally. Describe a vented snare and who captured that sound the best.
A vented snare. When I think of a vented snare, I think of a 20-ply vented snare with die-cast hoops, and I personally feel like the person who captured that tone the best was Chad Sexton from 311.
I agree on that one totally. Describe the experience around the NAMM show.
I've said this before, but the NAMM show, when you were a part of the Orange County family, really felt like being in a gang. It really felt like it was us against everybody else. And I don't say that in a confrontational or serious way. I just sort of feel like we were in a position where our products were highly coveted and we had relationships with, at that time, the biggest drummers in the world. And so when we walked around NAMM, we very much felt like it was us against everybody else.
All right. So now we're going to be moving on more to, like I said, the more in-depth one. So, how did you hear about O.C.D.P? Were you a drummer?
I was absolutely a drummer when I heard about Orange County Drum Percussion, and I was turned on to Orange County strictly by being a 311 fan. And I remember really being drawn to Chad's snare tone, and I remember vividly. I mean, this is pre-internet, so that was one of those things where you read in the liner notes of the album things about Orange County Drum. I mean, that's kind of when that legend sort of started, I think, with me. And then the first couple times you see any kind of video, and you wonder to yourself, like, what are those huge holes in the snare drum? Is that why he has a rad snare tone? It was one of those things where that was really my introduction to Orange County Drum. And oddly enough, it's crazy that I've actually become sort of friends with Chad through all these years, and I was the one that wrote the feature on him in Drumhead magazine, and he and I talked extensively about his snare tone and Orange County Drum and sort of the genesis of all of that. And it truly is fascinating to look back that far and to realize that that's the thing that flipped the switch for me.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you said that foreign word nowadays, like liner notes. I don't think people realize
Right,
if you wanted to get
right,
info, who was the producer, who's the engineer, where it was recorded,
yeah,
all the special thanks.
right.
Everyone takes for granted. You could just look it up on Instagram and, figure out who did
There
what.
it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Did you have to move to join Orange County?
Yes, I did. So I know I said I was originally from Wisconsin, but I went to college in Arizona, and I moved to California from Arizona in October of 2001. And working at Orange County Drum was my first job when I moved to California. And I had lined up that job before moving to California.
Smart man. Had a plan. What were you doing before O.C.D.P?
Well, this is a fun story. My degree is in broadcast production, and I was a news video editor. I worked in TV news for 5 years before I ever moved to California, which was counterintuitive to a lot of the people in Arizona at the time because I had a real job. I owned a home. I mean, there were parts of my life that were really sort of, on the trajectory to being an adult, right? And um, I really wanted to pursue a life in music. And by luck, I connected with Orange County Drum, and that's what literally spurred me to move from Arizona to Orange County, California.
All right. Prior to that, did you have any woodworking experience prior to working in Orange County?
I had zero experience whatsoever, which I honestly think is another thing that makes Orange County really magical because I feel like a lot of the people, obviously, who were there when I got there had lots of experience, years of experience. And honestly, I think that one of the things that I really enjoyed about that community of working there was everyone was willing to help everyone else along. We all viewed it as, if you were working at a fast food restaurant, it's like, oh, you work the register. Oh, you work the fries. Oh, you work the drive through, whatever. And so at Orange County, I feel like there was a progression of things and everybody sort of entered into everything. I mean, we used to call everybody a sanding bitch because when you first started there, strap on that mask and put on your wrist guard because you're going to sand for days and days and days, and your snot is going to be gray because of all the sawdust. And then eventually you sort of moved up. And at the time, there were people that sort of had specialized duties. I got to the point where a year and a half in, was the one that was wrapping all the drums. But again, it's a stair step kind of climbing the ladder sort of a thing. So no, I didn't have any woodworking experience, but one thing about Orange County is you learn real fast. So
Yeah. Would you say most of the people who work there were drummers though?
in my time there, I'm trying to think back to everybody that was in that crew. I think everybody except Vladi and Steve Severs were drummers. Vladi was a DJ, and Steve Severs, if I'm not mistaken, was a bass player. But besides those two guys, yep, everybody was a drummer. Oh, John Machado's not a drummer. He's a he's a cheating bass player as well. But but yeah, everybody else was a drummer.
I feel like at the very least, like if you didn't have any woodworking background or carpentry or anything like that, it was like you checked the box for being a drummer. I feel like most people who got a job there were,
Totally.
at least in that realm, or at least a musician.
Yep, totally. 100%.
What was a day to day like there?
Day to day, when we got to Orange County, usually consisted of the shop had how do I explain this? The shop had industrial shelving along one wall, and along that one wall, the metal the metal cross pieces that held the shelves all had orders stuck to them with magnets. And so the reason why that's important is normally all of us sort of knew what we were working on and where we left off, for example. And so it would be easy for us to revisit the shelving, grab the order from the magnet, and grab those drums, whatever phase of production they were in, and sort of follow through with that. When I got to the point where I was wrapping drums, the wrapping area was actually sort of in the middle of the shop. So, like, the front area was the showroom with the office, and then the next part was where the shelving was and where assembly was. The next part was where the wrapping tables and the wrap and the cutting machine were. The back was where the routing room was, where the machine to strip an edge was, and then the open garage door into the alley, which is where we sprayed. So for me, when I got to the point where I was wrapping drums, it was really easy for me to walk to those long tables in the middle of the shop and see whatever drums there are, that needed to be wrapped. They were sitting there, just wooden shells that were ready to rock and roll, usually with an order sitting by them, so that I knew what I needed to wrap them in, and then I would start my day.
So like when you were to put a scope for people to like grasp how many drums, like would you typically wrap in a day?
Oh my God. Um, wow. That's really hard to answer. The reason why that's hard to answer is because I think that depends on what I was wrapping it with. So, like, when I was wrapping drums with crushed glass sparkle, which is like the kit behind you in the middle, that stuff is thicker. It's harder on blades. It's just harder to kind of deal with. So sometimes that stuff takes a little longer. And then the yellow kit over your right shoulder, that is Formica, like what they put on countertops. That is also, it's hard to deal with because you can't really cut it. In order to cut a straight line, you're scoring it like several times, which just annihilates blades, your wrist, your fingers. Um, and so those just take a little bit longer. Whereas something like any kind of like a vinyl kind of a wrap, or any kind of like a satin
A satin flame
flame or
or
something like that, right?
sparkle?
That stuff is as thin as gift wrapping paper, to the point where our seams were actually double stick tape. That stuff's a lot easier to deal with. And as we continued to go on, the wrapping and that stuff got more complicated, because again, the kit over your right shoulder, that's Formica, but it has appliques on it. Like, that's a whole nother added step. Or the tri wrap right next to your left ear, when you're dealing with that stuff, again, it's a lot more difficult because you're trying to get the seams and all the colors correct. As you're wrapping it, it's called registration. You want those stripes to line up, when they come around to the seam. Excuse me. So some of those things take a longer time. And there was some trial and error. I mean, the more you do it, the less you screw it up. But for sure, again, getting back to how Daniel saw things and wanting to really go for perfection, especially if we're working on Travis's drums, those seams better be absolutely perfect, 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 perfect. And so oftentimes when we were doing stuff like that, things took a little bit longer. And like I said, I mean, leading up to the NAMM show, and even right after the NAMM show, there was a company out of Japan called the Pad Corporation, and everybody that worked at Orange County Drum remembers that Pad Corporation used to come to the Orange County booth before the show was open, and they would buy everything, or almost everything. And then after NAMM, they would put in their order. And the crazy thing about Pad Corporation is they ordered a ton of drums, and they ordered huge drum sets. So to answer your question about how many drums do I wrap in a day, well, if it was after the NAMM show and I was doing one of their big, 17-piece kits, depending upon what I was wrapping with, like that might take me the majority of the first part of my day.
Yeah. For those who have like never wrapped a drum, the best way I can describe it to somebody is like imagine trying to roll up a poster and it wants to drift, especially with, the tri bands or you see the flat black kit back here too. It's also, a laminate, drastically different than, all the materials. And I can't even imagine wrapping it in fur.
Oh my God. Well, it's funny that you brought that up because one of the things that very few people know is when you do wrap drums in fur, which we did a lot of, the glue is different. The seams are butt seamed instead of an overlap seam. And what we used to do is, or what you have to do is, you actually have to we used to take a soldering iron, it looks like a soldering gun, and we used to stick the tip of that gun from the inside of the drum shell through all of the holes so that we could screw the lugs through the fur. So sometimes we'd have to shave the fur a little bit so that we could get the lug to get close enough to the shell to attach it. But the one thing that you have to do is you have to burn away all of the fur and all the fabric and all that stuff. That stuff smells terrible. To be able to have access to the holes to attach the lugs to the outside of the kit. It was a very labor intensive process. And the fur is hard because you can't tell where your bubbles are. With everything else, you can very clearly see a bubble, and then you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to get rid of this bubble? And with the fur, it was impossible. You need to get these little folds, and it was a lot more challenging for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I immediately think John Otto's, red fur kit. Did you also have to leave like a little bit of play with the for the heads so it wouldn't like, couldn't be stretched over the fur, right?
Yeah, I think what we did was we used to do the outer edge a little bit different. So for those of you who don't know, the drums get wrapped before they get edged. Once you knock down once you cut down the edges of the material that you're wrapping it with, then you have you have a perfectly perpendicular cylinder. That's the goal. That's what you start with when you go to edge the drum. So after they edge the inner 45 to the bearing edge, that's the really important edging. The outer edging on drums with fur, to your point, they would take, I think that they took a grinder and they went down a little further to be able to kind of like give those kind of a haircut so that the collar of the head would actually fit over the bearing edge without any interference from the fur being too far up.
Yeah, I mean, just the unconventional materials to wrap drums. I don't think anybody really considers that, you know what I mean? Um,
Yeah,
so
we definitely had a lot of that.
yeah. So besides doing rapping, what other jobs did you do within the company?
Oh, man. Okay, so there's definitely the sanding thing. Sanding the insides of shells is something that's kind of your rite of passage. Everybody did that. And leading up to NAM, another good example, we would have sanding parties to the point where we'd get a couple pizzas, blah, 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 and all of us would be around the tables just rocking, just shell. Each of us would have a different grit sandpaper, and it was like an assembly line. So sanding the inside of shells is something that literally everybody did. So I definitely did that. So I definitely sanded the inside of drums. I definitely wrapped drums. I definitely sprayed the inside of drums, which in and of itself is a bit of an art form. Um, I also assembled drums. All of us kind of got to that point too. By the time everything is wrapped, edged, drilled and ready to go. Again, I mean, that's a very common area where all of us would grab an order, grab a kit, go to the table, grab the lugs it needed, grab the hoop, follow whatever's on the order. So I definitely assembled drums. The other thing I did, I probably the last, I'll say 9 months I worked there, I was one of the ones marking drums off. That is also an art form, and that is also pretty challenging, I would say. And I was sort of added into the group of people that was marking off drums because A, there was a lot of drums to be marked off, and B, at that time, I mean, the guy that trained me how to mark drums off was Jeremy Berman, and he, I believe, was out on the road teching, and he might have been with 36 Crazy Fists. He was with somebody, I don't remember who he was with, but because there were more drums to mark off and because there were less people to do it, I had been there long enough, and it was sort of my next sort of phase. So he taught me how to mark drums off. Max taught me how to wrap drums, and Max taught me how to spray drums, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that's pretty cool. It's also one of those things you kind of learn a little bit of everything. So, like, like you said, if somebody
Yeah,
was out on the road or in the studio, it wasn't like, well, drums aren't getting sprayed today.
yeah, that was not an
Yeah.
option.
What was the hierarchy? What was the hierarchy like? Who did you have to report to, or who was like was there like a manager in place, or?
Sure. I- I think that that's the only thing that sort of reminds me of a little bit more of a corporate thing, which I know sounds weird, but like when I think of like our bosses or whatever, I definitely think that obviously John, who was the vice president of the company, that's a big one, and his office was in the building and he was always there. Daniel, who is the president of the company, was generally on the road with Travis and was rarely there. And Josh Lamb is who I'm talking about. He was really the administrative guy because he generally took all the orders on the phone. Most of the writing that was on the orders that we were pulling off the shelving in the morning was Josh's. Josh is the one that coordinated all of that sort of stuff. So, in terms of a boss that I might have to check in with regarding something on an order, it would have been Josh. But I think everything in terms of like the actual physical act of like production, I would say that the very first person that I would go to ask questions or to get my marching orders was Jeremy. And I think that the reason why he and I had that relationship is I'm a morning guy. And so since Jeremy was the one that was there early to open up, me and a couple of other people would always arrive at about the same time as Jeremy. Oftentimes I would be sitting up against the door waiting for him to get there because I had to drive a little further than he did. So I would overcompensate, getting used to California traffic, like what is happening. And he would get there, unlock the door, and he and I would, sort of, shoot the shit for a little bit, and then, get to work.
Right on. What was your relationship like with Daniel?
Daniel and I still have a good relationship. He, I think he, I've already said that I really respected him for his drive and the fact that he sort of instilled that perfection mentality into what we did. I think he appreciated me because I was ever since I moved to California, I was always willing to work Saturdays. That wasn't common, by the way. If you needed extra money and blah blah blah, you could work 6 days a week, and I did. And Saturdays were always kind of a wild card because that's like when people would be on vacation and want to like, oh, I want to go see Orange County Drum. But that's also when like the guys from Unwritten Law would stumble through there. Like it's Saturdays were a little bit funky like that. But my point is, like, I think Daniel respected the fact that I was always willing to do the hard work. I rarely call in sick. Like when I started working there, I was a bit older than lots of the other guys making drums. And so I think Daniel appreciated the fact that I was always willing to get in there and do whatever needed to have done. And funny side story about Daniel, he also he also thought it was hilarious that I could name all the drummers' names for like any band. We were sitting at a place called Yellow Basket, which all of us love to eat breakfast at in Santa Ana. Before we were going to load into the NAMM show, and I was sitting in the booth next to Daniel, and Daniel said something like, "Well, nobody knows what the drummer's name is for Matchbox 20," and I was like, "Oh, it's Paul Doucette." Like, so he and I did that. Probably, I mean, so he got kind of like, it was like challenge accepted. Daniel was just like, "Oh, really? Who's the drummer for blah blah blah?" And I was like, "Boom." He's like, "Who's the drummer for blah blah blah?" And I was like, "Boom." So he and I kind of had a really fun and funny relationship in that way.
I mean, I wish I would have had more of those questions lined up to ask what drummer is what, you know what I mean? Um, so you had mentioned Unwritten, like one of the cool parts about Saturdays, like bands like Unwritten Law came in. Was it common to see like local bands, big or small, or guys just coming in to either hang or pick up drums?
Yeah, so it was really common for all kinds of people to be rolling through the shop, whether it was during the week or during the weekend. But I think that the weekends were a really popular time for people to come. And gosh, we saw band members, not just drummers, but band members from like every level of band, I would say. And Saturdays were a really fun and interesting time for people to just sort of like wander in. And I remember being truly shocked sometimes. Like I remember Bill Ward came in one time
Oh,
and it was just like, what? Yeah, he was with a pretty sure he was with a student of his at the time. Like, and the kid just got up on the riser in the showroom and was playing Travis's kit. Like, it was just like, what is happening? Um, that is definitely a common time for Adrian Young to swing in, which happened several times. Yeah, it was definitely common for people to roll through. The guys from Unwritten Law, or the guys from Bionic Jive, or the guys from Cottonmouth Kings. I mean, it was definitely, a destination, definitely a place to hang. And some of those guys used to come just to hang, and some of those guys used to come to pick up drums. Like I remember several times, like when Lou Dog would come and he'd walk in, and they'd order four pizzas, and he'd sit down, he'd start smoking bowls, and we'd start loading his drums into his car. Like that type of a setting was pretty common.
all right. So you mentioned Adrian Young. Obviously, he was in No Doubt, but he eventually became a partner in the company. What was your relationship like with him?
Adrian and I have a fun relationship. It's funny because I can say that with pretty much anybody that was associated back then. But like, um, I would say the two things that I'll say about Adrian. Number one, he was always so friendly to the people that worked at the shop, and I remember having him come in, and he played on our boombox at the time. He played the Rocksteady album for us months, plural, months before it came out. And I remember all of us were just like, it was really, really cool. And he and I always had a kinship because, again, I was one of the older guys. But at the time, I had like a purple mohawk. So like he'd walk in with a mohawk, I'd be there with a mohawk, and it was like the Spider-Man meme a little bit, like us sort of. And it's funny because he and I have talked about that several times. And the other thing that I thought was really cool about Adrian, and my relationship to Adrian, is I remember one of the first times we were building one of his iconic acrylic jelly bean kits, the light up jelly bean kits. And I remember talking to him about that kit. Like we were kind of in the midst of doing it while he was, standing there. We're all just sort of chatting about it. And during that conversation, I think is when it was revealed that that was going to be the kit. Like the kit that we were touching, the kit that we were working on in the moment was going to be used for the Super Bowl halftime show. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh my God. And what was even more interesting about that is when that happened, Adrian's wife, I think her name is Nina, Adrian's wife was pregnant, and at the last minute, Adrian couldn't play that show. And I'm 95% sure that Josh Freese subbed for Adrian and played those drums on the Super Bowl halftime show. You'll have to fact check me on that, but
Wow.
I'm 95% sure that's right.
Wow.
So I remember watching the Super Bowl and like looking at the TV going like, I built those. Like it was bananas.
Yeah, I guess it's got to be like a surreal moment. You kind of just got to realize, like, yeah, it's a paycheck, but it's also like, oh, holy crap! I assembled those last week. Like
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like that was my hands were
Yep.
on that.
Yep. And I think that's another key. Earlier you were asking me about the weekends. I think the weekends was also it was a really solid time to make a lot of progress because the phones weren't ringing off the hook. We weren't distracted by a bunch of things. There wasn't a full crew there, and that was typically one of those days where a Saturday starts out like no other day. Because here's what we do to start a Saturday: we sit down and we start building screws. So one of the things that Orange County Drum was well known for were the Allen head stainless screws that we assembled all the lugs with, and on the screw there was a seal washer and a lock washer. Well, attention kids, those don't come that way. We used to sit around the table and all of us had purple blisters on our thumbs from pushing screws into those seal washers, and we would literally make buckets of 10 ply screws, 20 ply screws, 30 ply screws. And so we would start our day just kind of like, enjoying our coffee, chatting about whatever show we went to last night, laughing and doing our thing and building screws. But then the other thing that usually happened on the weekends is that's when the tour cargo companies would come through to pick up the kit that was going to the Super Bowl, or the kit that was going to Saturday Night Live, or the kit that was going out on the road with Limp Bizkit or whatever. So that was a really good final day for sort of like that quality control. That's not to say that it didn't happen during the week, but Saturdays were definitely big for stuff like that.
Yeah. So like when you had, you know what I mean, say the deadline for Super Bowl, were other orders kind of pushed to the side, or was that kind of like put to the front, or was it enough was the timing was in place to avoid that?
Great question. Yeah, you're asking about priorities when there's deadlines with big kits. I would say my first answer to your question would be I think that that's really where Josh was really good at his job, because one of the things he was able to do is he was able to say, okay, this kit has a deadline of this, so I'm going to ask, those three people to focus on that, to be able to knock that thing out, and then everybody else can focus on everything else. And the only other thing that really adds to that answer is it did kind of matter who the the drums were for. Um, Daniel and Travis specific. One of the things that made Travis really unique back then is he had so many different kits, iconic kits that he was well known for. But I think what that did was that we got sort of pressed into service, sort of at the drop of a hat, because an opportunity would pop up for him where we knew that we needed to act quickly. So if you think about how Travis is today, where he's dipping his toe like in all of these pools, he was exactly the same way back then. And so as things would pop up, it's like if you think back to that time and you think, well, Blink and Transplants and Boxcar Racer all sort of existed at the same time. And he was doing other stuff, and he's shooting a video with this band and going on the road with that band and needs a Europe rig for that. Like, so all of those things that happen today were happening back then. And what that does to a small crew like at Orange County Drum, where the president of the company is Travis's tech, like it was definitely, to answer your question, sometimes we would have to drop everything so that we could pull off the nearly impossible feat of doing what we needed to do when we needed to do it.
Do you think that added an added pressure between it being like, say, Travis, where you said Daniel has the attention to detail and wants perfection, and on top of that, it's now rushed? Not rushed, but you know what I
I
mean, more pushed to the
Yeah,
forefront.
I think some people might say that that was added pressure, but from my perspective, I think that in that sense, pressure makes diamonds. I sort of feel like because we were involved in some really high end, high profile drums, it kind of forced us to treat everybody's drums like that. So the fact that there was a quicker timeline, I mean, I don't want to toot my own horn here, but we all got to a certain point where it was a well oiled machine and we were all really good at what we did. Sure, people made mistakes, but by and large, by that late in the game, like there weren't a lot of screw ups, there weren't a lot of delays, and so my point is, although we had a shorter time period to be able to complete that stuff, it didn't really affect us. It's like being a quarterback and having to run the 2-minute offense. It's like it's still football. Like there's still plays. You're still trying to score. You're still trying to move the ball. So it is what it is. But I appreciate the fact, and I can say to a man, we never cut corners. We were never like, oh, this is Joe Smith's kit. I'm gonna not do the normal stuff to this because it's not Travis's kit. Like that didn't happen. We didn't do that.
Yeah, I think one thing that always stuck out to me on the website was like no matter what the kit was or who it was for, whatever the size of the kit or snare, it was always the same man hours went to everything. The only thing that affected the price was the finish. It was like everybody got the same level of detail and attention and love, you know?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, we really took a lot of pride in our craftsmanship. We really took a lot of pride in creating something amazing. We always wanted it to live up to its reputation. One thing about Orange County Drum, you asked about NAM before. Our reputation preceded us. We got to NAM and it was just like, eyes the size of dinner plates at what was at the booth. But also, people saw that insignia on your Dickies shirt. They Orange County back then and still today, like it's the real deal. And so we all took a lot of care in creating things that people would love and that represented, what we stood for. And I mean, the amount of times that we got a drum back where somebody was unsatisfied or where there was something wrong, dude, in 4 years there, I mean, I think I can remember like that happened like twice. You know, I wish the blue was darker, like stuff that wasn't, like, yeah,
It wasn't an integral thing, or it wasn't like the drum wasn't performing. It was just like, a very,
no,
wrong shade or.
right. Yep.
So, I just wanted to circle back because we were talking about like the website and how every drum got a crazy amount of attention put into it. One of the things that always stuck out to me was the internal hardware. I think a lot of people overlook. Why did you guys use such like high end like stainless steel screws and seal washers versus I feel like with other drums it was just like here's the cheapest screw at the hardware store.
Yeah. The reason why we use that internal hardware, there's three reasons. Number one, it's the best. Number two, I think I remember hearing John specifically say that he felt like when he saw other drums that just had basic, cheap Phillips head screws, he felt that that looked cheap. And whether that's true or not, I think perception is reality. And I think anybody that ever owned Orange County stuff knows it wasn't cheap. And so if you're going to put all of that money into something, into a high end piece of art, an instrument like this, something that's hand built, it should be top notch. So I think we used it because it was the best. We used it because John thought that the alternative looked cheap. And we also used it because it was the thing that helped to ensure that our instruments were going to perform at the best of their ability. For example, how many times have you ever heard of a screw in a lug in an Orange County drum backing out? It just doesn't happen that much because of the seal washer and because of the lock washer. And I think that those pieces of hardware helped to ensure that our instruments were going to sound the best they possibly could and not fail the person who designed and loves them.
Yeah, I mean, I also like look at, other competitors that were in the custom game and like, from face value, you have a red, white, and blue kit, but they don't know what's under the hood. You know what I mean? And
Right.
I think also like my theory about it too was always that from like an audio standpoint, if you're in the studio, everything is decoupled, right? It's a room inside of a room. Your speakers are decoupled.
Sure.
I feel like you're decoupling the metal from metal contact. Like, you're letting the drum, like you said, perform at its best when it's not,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, and just to piggyback on that, I don't. I mean, at the time when we first started using the first generation of those Gauger mounts, the free floating Gauger mounts on the toms, um, like the aluminum ones that's on the red, white, and blue kit right behind your head, and on that flat black kit, um, I remember thinking to myself like, "Oh, these are next level," because so many of the other companies, like when I moved to California, I was playing Pearl. And so the kit that I had then had those the Pearl ISS mounts, which back then were revolutionary. But the reason why people didn't like them was because, and I'm not talking trash on Pearl, I'm just saying, like, back then, the knock on those things were the things that attached them to the hoops, like put pressure on the hoops. Like, that did, in fact, end up having an impact on this, probably the tone and definitely the resonance, and in terms of the length of time that those things resonate with those drums. And so when Orange County was using Gaugers, I was just like, wow, like even this is cutting edge. Even this is enhancing the sound and how these drums resonate and what their tonality is like. Like, I realized back then, oh wow, even this stuff is top of the line. We were the first company, I think, to start using the original plastic trick throw offs, which eventually, I mean, some people liked those, some people didn't, but those things evolved into the machined aluminum ones now that have that swing arm, which I have on almost every snare drum I own. And all that stuff is, you know, I think in John's brain and in Daniel's brain, they always wanted these things to be the best and to be worth the money. I mean, even down to the wrap that we're talking about. A minute ago, you said you could have a red, white, and blue kit and not know what's under the hood. Well, here's the other part about that: crushed glass sparkle is more expensive, is more dynamic, is, in my opinion, way sexier than the regular cheap Fleck sparkle. And a lot of the other drum companies, not to name names, but when they were making red, white, and blue kits, they were that cheap sparkle. I'm not calling them cheap. I'm just saying, like, there was a big difference. And when you saw Orange County Drums on stage under stage lights, they just came alive, and it was really obvious.
I think it is so cool that like no corners were cut. You know what I mean? Like I remember somewhere down the line, someone said to me once, like, yeah, they were like the Cadillac of drums, like Rogers used to be. They were just, no expense spared.
Yep, none at all.
Yeah. Um, what was your relationship like with John?
John and I had a great relationship. He also enjoyed making fun of me because I was one of the older dudes. And also, a few people already know this story, but when I came there for my job interview, coming from the corporate Arizona, thing, I didn't live in California yet when I actually interviewed, and I walked in not knowing what to expect, and I walked in a suit and tie, and I stood in the lobby. John and I had gotten our wires crossed about what time he was going to be there, and I must have stood in the lobby for 45 minutes waiting for John to get there, like just standing there in a suit and tie, sweating bullets. And he got there, and you know, he gets there and he's in dolphin shorts and a cut off t-shirt, and then he starts asking me, like, questions about, getting dirty and sawdusty and sweaty and building drums. And he never forgot that. And so he generally always sort of liked the fact that I showed up in a suit. So he and I always had a really good relationship. And I think, kind of like Daniel, John always appreciated, like I said about the working 6 days thing. Dude, I think the amount of people that came in on Saturdays was typically between 3 and 5. There weren't, not a lot of us did that, but I did it religiously. I was there every freaking Saturday. And so I think that John really appreciated the fact that, again, I was willing to work my butt off. I was willing to, like, I never said no. I never said, sometimes I would say, I don't know how to do that, or I'm not that good at doing that. I remember I had just gotten trained to start filing snare beds, and I lacked confidence. It was something I was brand new at, and it was people like Jeremy and Max and John that would encourage me, like, here, go grab one of the shells that we're going to throw away because it's screwed up, and practice on that. So I think that John and I always had a good relationship. I also think that he appreciated the fact that, like, I didn't often. I think mistakes get made when you're doing that sort of stuff. And to your point, you're employing people that some of us don't have a lot of experience. And I think that he appreciated the fact that, by and large, I didn't make a lot of mistakes. I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm just saying I pay attention. I have attention to detail. I read directions. I work as instructed. That's typically my vibe. And I think he appreciated that about me.
So you mentioned on a Saturday it's sometimes only 3 or 5 guys. During the normal work week, how many guys were typically working in the shop?
Good question. I would say the number of guys working in the shop. Well, John and Josh were always there. Steve Muncie was always at that front table. So that's three. And then I would say it was always me, Jeremy, Max, Nick, Dean, Dave, Vladi, Steve, Ben, Chuck. So yeah, 10 to 15 maybe. Which, again, by the way, that's freaky. That many killer drums came out of essentially a storage unit with 15, sawdusty dudes running around. Sometimes Daniel was there digging in. Sometimes Mike Kelly was there digging in. He was a lot more sporadic back in the day because he was the tech for POD, for Love, the drummer for POD. So he was gone a lot. But he and Daniel, when they were not on tour, they'd sort of regularly be at the shop digging in.
Was it common to have a lot of guys work there and also be touring drum techs?
Not all of them. It was common for um, 3 or 4 of them. I would say the guys that came and went for touring stuff or for studio teching stuff were Jeremy, Mike Kelly, Daniel, and sometimes Steve. Steve really developed a close relationship with Chad Sexton, and would regularly, like, deliver drum sets to the studio, or take color samples and stuff like that to directly to Chad. I do remember that when they shot the music video for Creatures for a while, that is the single off of the Evolver record, I believe. And I'm pretty sure that we had just finished Chad's, like, dream kit at the time. That kit was quilted maple, and at the time Chad was obsessed with like a highlighter blue. So that thing was candied highlighter blue, and then we blew high gloss over the quilted maple, and it was a big kit. And and Steve delivered that to a local place. It was like a restaurant that they shut down, like a tiki restaurant, and they shot the video there where people were skateboarding around them and stuff like that. And I remember seeing that kit on MTV, like, oh my god, like, Steve delivered that thing 3 weeks ago. Like, it was bonkers. That stuff happened all the time, by the way, all the time.
So you mean like it was you would have to be called to make a special delivery? Like, hey, someone's shooting a
Or
music
no,
video. We need you to go run this.
yeah, no, yeah. What I was going to say was, it happened all the time where you would turn on MTV or see a video online, and you'd be like, "Oh my god, there's that kid." So, and that happened all the time.
feel like a lot of the drummers these days are they don't get the get what we had, like you said, MTV, TRL. Like you could see what the drummer was playing. You know what I mean? You could just sit there and watch it
Yes.
live in the moment. Or like you said, the liner notes. Now it's like unless you go see them live, you don't really know what the drummer's playing.
Yeah, I would say that you're right. And I think that there are some drummers out there that are really good about speaking out and talking about their gear, whether it's sticks or heads or hardware or cymbals or drums or whatever. And I think that sometimes if the drummer's big enough, the company also sort of participates in that kind of a relationship. Like the guy that pops into my mind is Todd Sucherman, the guy that plays for Styx. He plays Sonar. Sonar talks about Todd. Todd talks about Sonar. It's really obvious that Todd loves Sonar and Sonar loves Todd. And I think that there are those sort of symbiotic relationships between manufacturers and musicians, and it is nice to see. But to your point, you're right. It's unless both companies are talking about it like in that sort of a setting, it's a little harder to know kind of who plays what and why and who they're associated with and why they made those choices and yada yada.
So I know you have a lot of them. What was some of your coolest memories that stick out to you?
Man, well, let me think here. Okay, I have a few. I'll tell a couple of quick ones. So I, you asked me a minute ago if sometimes we were called to deliver things. I was asked to deliver something twice. So one time I had to deliver side snare, a custom side snare to Ray Luzier. And Ray at the time was playing for David Lee Roth. He had that gig for 700 years. Anyway, we had this snare drum that he really, really wanted. And it was during the tour at Glen Helen Pavilion out in the Coachella Valley. And it was the double headline bill between Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth. And I'm pretty sure that as that tour was going on, they were alternating who was headlining. Anyway, so I had this snare drum. I hadn't lived here long. I had never driven to Coachella Valley. And I was in a band at the time. And my singer knew where this place was, and I was like, "Hey, man, like I can get us into that show for free if you can just get me out there." So it was one of my first experiences of like being added to artist will call. So we drive out to the pavilion. We can't bring the drum in with us, so it's like out in the car. David Lee Roth was playing first. We walked in. We watched the show, and Ray was just on fire. They opened with like Hot for Teacher. It was bananas. And then right after that, we ran back to the car, grabbed the drum, went backstage. Like I met David Lee Roth, handed Ray the snare. Ray was all jacked, was like, "Oh my god, this is awesome," and blah blah blah. He and I still talk about that snare drum, by the way. So that was cool. That was a delivery story. The other delivery story is um, same kind of a thing. We had made another snare drum for Chad Sexton from 311, and it was way back when they were playing Warp Tour, not like just a couple weeks ago here in Long Beach. And it just so happened that they were going to be playing in Phoenix. Well, I have family in Phoenix, and I was already planning on being in Phoenix. So John was just like, he must have said something like, "I'll give you $100 if you like, will you take the, because I was already going and I was like, yeah, sure. So, and I was by myself. So I literally drove to Arizona, and it was one of those things where I was on Artist Will Call at Warp Tour, which blew my mind, right? Like I get to Warp Tour and I'm just like, wow, I'm driving past all these, I'm parking back here. Like this is bananas. And the funny thing is that at the time, I liked college football, not much anymore, but I liked the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Well, I knew that all the guys in 311 were from Omaha, and I brought my Nebraska hat with me. So as I was walking in and I was trying to say like, no, I'm delivering this to Chad Sexton, blah blah blah. The guy wouldn't let me in, and Peanut and Essay were walking by, and I was just like, I'm with them, and I pointed at my hat and I held up the drum, and Peanut looked right at me and he's just like, he's with us. Peanut had never met me before. He's like, he's with us, and so I literally like walked past this dude, and I was like, oh thanks, chit chatting with them, blah blah blah, saw all of Chad's drums like ready to go up on stage, like handed him it was great. It was so cool. And then I watched that whole show like side stage, and I was like, this is unreal. Like watching all these people lose their mind, and I was like watching one of my favorite bands from like 20 feet away. It was crazy.
I'm very envious. You mentioned Warp Tour. I don't think, obviously it's back in the, with doing runs of shows and everything like that. But back then, in what year would that have been? Just how crazy, like
Mm.
Warp Tour was the place to be. You know,
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm gonna say that was, I'll say 2002 or 2003. I mean, it's back when Warp Tour was just like this massive. It was the tour. I mean, it was equally as big, if not bigger, than what Lollapalooza was, 10 years before or whatever. I mean, I definitely think that that was the equivalent to how big that festival was back then, for sure.
yeah, it was almost like I felt like if you didn't go, you weren't cool. It was like our version,
Sure.
like my age's version of like Woodstock. Like you
I
gotta
totally
go.
agree. And what I think is so funny is earlier I was talking about Saturdays, and that's when the cartage companies would come and pick up drums and stuff like that. What was so interesting about Warp Tour back then, like, I mean, I'm this is probably hyperbolic, but like I feel like 80% of the acts that were playing on Warp Tour were OCDP artists. Like thinking back, like what else were they playing? Like I'm being sort of funny, I guess, but like I honestly I couldn't tell you what anybody else was playing. Maybe a couple of Pork Pie Kits, couple DW, couple Tama, couple Pearl, but like by and large, I think it was OC mostly.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I want to just like dive into Warp Tour is that that's how I was, personally exposed to Orange County. You kept seeing this like oval logo. Do you think having Warp Tour helped the success of Orange County?
I do, and you're gonna think I'm crazy, but I think two things put Orange County Drum on the map as it relates to a Warp Tour. I think the first thing, you just nailed it. That logo was ubiquitous. I mean, that logo was so iconic and so recognizable. And I think the other thing is, and again, people think I'm nuts. The two holes in the front bass drum. I mean, there are companies who have copied that like over the years since, but Orange County was absolutely the first company to do that a lot, and it made the kits immediately recognizable.
Oh, totally. I mean, I feel like drums were just in general very traditional. And then, like you said, you have like a vented snare. Why is there holes in my snare drum? But also, mainly, I feel like I never saw ported kick heads, and then you have two of them.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I remember with early Orange County kits was I remember seeing some crazy colors. Like it's definitely the first time I ever saw like a hot pink kit or like whatever, like a pumpkin orange kit. Like I remember thinking to myself like, wow, like those are funky colors because all of us that think drums were like, oh yeah, marine pearl and black and white and okay, silver glass sparkle. Like all of us, champagne. Like all of us know the normal stuff, and so whenever you see a bubblegum pink kit, you're like, what? And I'm not sure if I ever saw powder coated hardware before. Like I remember the first couple times I saw like, drums that had like black hardware, like on that yellow kit over your shoulder. Like I remember thinking to myself, like, you can do that? I think back to like Greg Bissonette's David Lee Roth kit, and it was red and it had like white hardware. I remember the first time I saw that and I was like, what is that? How can you do that? That looks like a toy. Like I didn't understand it. And then I started to see it more often, along with that oval logo and the two portholes in the bass drum. And I was like, oh, two and two is four. Like, oh, that's Orange County Drum. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same kind of thing. I feel like powder coating existed. Like I know with Greg Bissonette also had like that big black pearl kit with the white hardware too. But I feel
Yep.
like Orange County really found a way to play off of color schemes. Like the example, the yellow kit back there with the black stars. I have a snare that matches that has yellow hardware with black wrap and yellow stars. Like I feel like they really just again that motto, the only limitation is your imagination.
Yep, 100%. And by the way, that I think is one of the best slogans of any company because it was absolutely 1000% the truth. And I just want to say one thing about John and Daniel, and the cool thing about them is that they always encouraged all of us to push the envelope. Like it was cool that John was the type of person where he was really receptive, that if you had an idea that he thought was worth pursuing, he would absolutely be like, yeah, give it a try. Let's see what it looks like. Knock yourself out. And being able to have that sort of encouragement, excuse me, only helped us to continue to push the envelope. And that was the thing that also set us apart. When we got to NAM and we put our stuff out for this year, we'd be like, oh, wow, look at all those other companies that put out all the stuff that we did last year. And here's the stuff that we did this year. And it's like every year over year would be like that. It's like, I don't want to say everybody was a copycat. That's not fair. And I don't want to be disparaging, but I have to acknowledge the fact that we were very much on the cutting edge of a lot of that stuff, which was super fun.
Yeah, like it just always felt like, you know what I mean? What can we do next? Like the
Oh
example,
yeah.
like, do you know who happened to do the double port or like what artist requested that? Or was that just kind of a thing like John and Daniel had said, go for it?
it like everything else. So like the first vented snare drum, Mike Kelly can tell you it was an error. He was drilling an air vent. Yep, and I'm pretty sure he was drilling an air vent. It was too big. The grommet that they bought didn't fit. Whatever, and just for the hell of it, because they were going to junk that shell, he took a hole cutter that you use to cut a hole into a blank door, and that's what he used. So the reason why that's relevant is I have a feeling that double port thing ended up being birthed from a mistake. Like I have a feeling that they were trying to get the logo right, and that then they realized that the hole was in the wrong position for maybe what the artist wanted or what they had previously agreed on. So they were just like, "Hey, I have an idea. Let's put one here too. Oh, that looks kind of dope." Like if I know Orange County, if I understand the genesis of any of that stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if that stuff was the result of a happy accident. That's the truth.
So we obviously know they had some of the biggest artists at the time. And Orange County was known for making anything you wanted. Was it the artist who was choosing some of these more interesting sizes, or was that like a push you guys were doing as the builders?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, as it relates to sizes, I think some drummers have very specific interests in terms of sizing. Um, but I also feel like um, when we started to use like things like acrylic and things like mounting lights inside, I think we were really interested in creating something visually that looked different, that also sounded amazing. And so I think back to some of those Adrian era kits where we were really interested in creating some more of those compact toms. Like we did that on several kits, and I think sometimes that was to like fit them over a larger bass drum or a deeper bass drum. Because that's the other thing too, is that I remember when we were doing like a lot of those, 20 by 20 bass drums, the fact that they were as deep as they were, it didn't matter how you set up. You were going to have to try to figure out a way to get those toms to fit over the top of them. So we started to really play around with compact toms, and much like lots of the things that we did when we got there, or much like lots of the things that we did when we started them, some of those things took off like a trend. And so I think that when we first started to do some of those compact toms, I remember then starting to like get more orders that just had compact toms. And I was thinking to myself, like, huh, this is weird. And I guess I never really knew if that was the artist driving toward that or Josh, in salesman mode going like, hey, lately we've been making some of these things and they're a little bit smaller, they fit over the bass drum and they sound incredible, and maybe they were a little cheaper. I don't know. So I have a feeling that it's probably a combination of what the artists wanted, what we started doing, and then the trend that sort of took off really from there.
I think I was under the impression that, like you said, regarding the vents or even the kick ports, that it was like maybe a happy accident. I always thought it was
Yeah.
something where like, hey, we have all these cutoffs from all these shells. What do we do with them? And being smaller and not trying to waste, it was something that, an idea was birthed from it.
Yeah, we definitely, one of the things that I always appreciated about Orange County too is back then, um we definitely, John never wanted to be wasteful. And so, to your point, I think that if we were getting, let's say we were getting, 12-inch and 14-inch, Keller maple tubes, I can see us making a bunch of the sort of standard size toms and then getting down to the end and going like, well, that's a little too short. That's kind of a weird size. Let's hack 2 inches off, make reinforcement hoops and make a shallow. Like we were definitely the type of company that enjoyed trying to see if we could use scraps in that way. Honestly, I think that that's part of how a lot of the multi wraps came to pass. It's like, when you've got a huge roll of Formica or a huge roll of silver glass sparkle, which I've already said was pretty expensive, it's like, well, when you've got a strip that's like this, you're not going to wrap anything in it. So then you start to think, well, I've got a strip like this that's red, a strip that's this that's blue, and a strip like this that's silver. I have an idea. Let's cut them down to 3 inches. Let's butt them up against each other. Let's figure out if, that's kind of how some of that stuff happens. Do I think that there were other companies that made tri wraps? For sure there was. Were we the first? I have no idea. But I mean, looking back on it, it's crazy. It's wild to see how iconic those things became, even if it was born from, trying to use scraps or trying to keep up with the Joneses. I don't know.
I feel like Slingerland and Ludwig in the 70s used to do like the parade drums where it was a tri band, you know what I mean, for school
Yeah.
colors. But what stood
Yep.
out to me is that you guys always had such intricate wraps of tiny stripes and really interesting patterns. Were you the one who came up with that, or like when you were at your wrapping station, was it just like an idea that popped into your head, or
Yeah. I won't take credit for very many things, but I will take credit for that. I had been trained to wrap drums, and for the longest time, we were cutting all of these wraps using X-Acto blades and straight edges. And like I said before about Formica, you have to score it like 15 times in order for it to crack off in a straight line. And no joke, it's just really hard on your hands. It's really hard on your forearms. It's really hard. And, it was hot as hell in the summertime in that shop. Like, it just wasn't fun. And at a certain point, um, John purchased a piece of equipment called a Vertex. I think it's Vertex, Variax, something like that. It starts with a V. Um, Vertec, I think is what it's called. And it's a material cutter. And so what you do is you set the width of the strip that you need cut, and then you would feed the material through this thing, and it would sort of pull it into the machine and cut it. And the excess would come off one side, and then the strip that you were looking for came through the middle. And I had a big chart that we made where it's like, oh, you're wrapping a 14-inch drum, you need a 15 and a half inch, like we had a chart, so like I knew what width I would need to send through the machine for the certain size drum that we had. And so I was, when John brought that machine into the shop for the very first time, he ran it first and he was like, oh my god, this is amazing, and this will make our cuts better and this will speed up the process and blah blah blah. And then I remember Jeremy used it and I was standing next to him, and then I'm pretty sure I was the third one to use it. I was like, wow, this is incredible. And since at that time I was the one that had actively been wrapping most of the drums, I thought to myself like, oh my god, it's like winning the lotto, because I was like, wow, this is incredible. I'm going to be able to do this, crazy, like accurately and pretty fast. And so I was really excited about it. So as I was starting to use that, again, getting back to the Orange County Drum liked to make use of scraps. I remember I was just looking at the machine one day and I'm like, I wonder how narrow I can set that gate. And I didn't know the answer. And so I went into the office and I said to John, I go, hey, I said, how narrow can I make the gate on that new material cutter? And he was just like, I don't know. He's like, why? And I go, I would be curious to know if it could cut like a thin strip. And he was just like, he said, why would you want to do that? And I said, well, it's kind of the same concept as the tri wrap, but like I just don't know if I'm able to like. And he was just like, yeah. He goes, why don't you just go? He had said this to me 100 times. Why don't you go grab a scrap shell out of the trash, and why don't you grab a material that we have a ton of and give it a try? And I said, okay. I said, what material should I use? I wanted him to be able to sort of advise me. And I said, what material should I use? And he goes, well, we always have a ton of black gloss Formica. So he goes, we've got rolls and rolls and rolls of black gloss. He goes, use black gloss and use the Blue Canyon marble. For anybody that doesn't live in Southern California, Blue Canyon marble, he got it super duper cheap, and he had these giant rolls of it, and it is what covered all of the surfaces and countertops at all of the movie theaters around Southern California. So I wasn't from here, so I didn't know that. So he said, yeah, I hate Blue Canyon marble. He goes, use Blue Canyon marble, use black gloss. And so I did. And the first time I set it way too narrow, and it just chewed up the material, and little shards of it were like flying over my shoulder. I was like, okay, wrong, and then I would like tweak it back a little. Anyway, so I did that, and I built that snare drum, and it was black gloss, a thin little strip of Blue Canyon marble, a thin little strip of black, another thin little strip of Blue Canyon marble, and then black. And so they're like racing stripes almost. And I got to be honest with you, it was badass. I cut all of those strips, and then what you do is you sand the edges of the material so that you can make the seams absolutely like perfect. So I did that, and then I flipped it over. I put all the seams together, and then what you do is you take masking tape. So I masking taped everything together so that all of the strips were together and as one piece. Then I glued it, then I wrapped it. And when I did, the only like mistake that I made was the margin for error when you have a large tri wrap kit is okay. To be able to get them to line up is pretty easy, and you can kind of fix it as you're going. When you have little teeny tiny strips like that, the margin for error is nothing. You get a little bit off, and those things are, And so when I came around to the seam, it was like, I don't know. It's like I don't know, it's like a quarter of an inch off, they just barely didn't line up. And I was like, but that glue is so aggressive. It's just like, well, what's done is done. And so, I pulled off all the protective, this and that, whatever. And I was just like, I'm sorry, this thing looks bitchin'. So I walked it into the office and I showed it to John. And I always knew when John was really excited about something because he held it in his hand. And he had this method for sort of like flipping his mullet over his shoulder. And like he held it in his hand and he sort of flipped his mullet over his shoulder and he kind of chuckled and he looked up at me and then he looked back down to this thing and kind of chuckled. And then he looked up at me and he's like, that's pretty cool. And then he handed it to me. And I will never forget that day as long as I live. And then as I was walking out of the office, he goes, do you want it? And I turned around and I was like, what? And he goes, it's your idea. He goes, you pay me for the hardware. He goes, why don't you build that? And I was just like, really? And he was like, yeah. So I did. And I had that drum for a long time. I sold that drum, which drives me bananas. And I actually think that the last time you and I talked, I think you found that drum.
I currently know where it is. If you're still wondering,
I...
yeah, I know where it is. It's funny.
But it's rad looking,
Yeah,
right?
it
It looks
sticks out.
awesome.
Yeah. And it's funny that it's rad looking from two materials that are kind of just, like you said, in abundance, or just nothing that stood out on its own. But when,
Right.
together, like you said, was kind of groundbreaking. Like for me, what stuck out, you remember Alex's kit from Finch with the black with the two
Yep.
red
Red
strip.
and black.
Yeah, like to me, like I remember seeing that as a kid. I was really big into Finch. Like they really took the scene, and it was like, what is that? Like like you said, we'd seen the tri-band kits, but nothing with like pinstripes. And I'm like, oh, it's a wrap too. It's not paint.
Well, and it's funny. That was a Saturday pickup, and Alex, his last name is Pappas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the funny thing is I always called him Potato, Pappas is Spanish. Anyways, for those of you who don't speak Spanish, um, I don't speak Spanish either, but I know that Pappas, when I'm reading a menu, is potatoes. Anyway, so I always called him Potato. And they that whole band came in to Orange County to pick up that kit, and Alex was orbiting Saturn, um, and he looked at that kit and yeah, I mean, he was super super duper not sober, and when he looked at that kit, he was just like, oh my god, like it was. He was so blown away. He was so excited. That definitely would have been one of those moments where, if social media existed, that he would have been like, check this out, like picture, like it would have been live streaming, like, because it was so, he was absolutely blown away. Absolutely. That was a really fun day.
Yeah. So we've obviously talked about lots of, attention to detail that went into the drums and the man hours and everything. Do you think that the kits and the drums were priced accordingly for that?
People paid it. Um, yeah, I do. Look, I know that this is kind of one of those topics that has been beat up over the years, because I know that it was always um, expensive. But um, I'm going to tell you right now, yeah, I think those were worth it. And the reason why I think that they were worth it is because of all of the TLC that went into every single one of those drums. And I will say this too. One thing that it would be hard to dispute is, my God, those drums sounded great. And I think that whatever hesitation someone might have had in terms of the amount of money that they were going to spend, I would hazard a guess that a lot of that kind of evaporated once they got their drums and they were like, oh my God, this thing sounds incredible. Like, the people who loved Orange County drums loved them. And I would say that most of those people thought that they were pretty appropriately priced. I also feel like, the powers that be, whether that's Adrian and John and Josh and Daniel and whomever, like, I think that they saw an opportunity where, business 101 states all the rules about supply and demand. Like, bro, the demand was there, like, by a lot. And so, you sort of lean into that. And I want to also remind everybody listening too. I think there's one other important piece of this when you start to consider the cost. And if you felt like the cost of some of those drums was a little high, I've told this story in the past. I've referred to this in other podcasts, and it's the truth. I think that because people were spending that kind of money on the drums, it's one of the things that allowed Orange County Drum to continue to push the envelope to get all of the best internal hardware, all of the best, strainers, all of the best throw offs, all of the most unique material. Like, all of that stuff was all made possible by the growing popularity of the brand and the fact that people were willing to continue to support the brand. And I think that that's partially how you grow a brand. And I think that that's one of the things that Orange County was able to do, as proven by the fact that during my time there, we doubled our warehouse space.
Oh,
When I started there, we were in one warehouse space, and everything happened in the room that I had described before, with the tables, the router room, the back. Well, in my time there, halfway through my time there, we took over the space next door. And then when we did that, we had a clean side and a dirty side. So the dirty side was the only place where there would be sawdust and a router room and, spray and like all that crazy sort of, wear a mask type of stuff. And the other side was clean. It was only for, polishing, building screws, putting appliques on kits, assembling kits, tuning kits, boxing kits, stuff like that. So it was amazing to be able to sit in that place and go like, wow, clearly we're growing. We're quite literally twice as big now. Like, this is kind of incredible.
so it's safe to say you worked there probably at the height of their popularity.
I think so. I mean, I'm probably a little bit biased, but yeah, I mean, I would say that I worked there in the height of the popularity. I would think that things were probably really heating up a year leading up to me being there. But I mean, hey, at the end of my employment there, is that's when the Guitar Center acquisition happened. And some people would argue, like, oh, well, that's when Orange County Drum got really big. But most people argue, well, no, that's really when it became something else. It's when it became, you know, almost like a Guitar Center proprietary, like, Guitar Center also, not to talk trash about Guitar Center, they're not stupid. Like,
Hmm.
they know that that logo above your head means something, and they knew that they could also leverage the popularity of that logo to be something that was more widely um, available to other drummers out there. And so, yeah. So, in terms of its popularity, yes, I feel like I was there during the peak, and I also feel like I was there right up until the point at which a lot of that changed.
Do you think John and Daniel also realized that? That's why they partnered with their sponsored the Guitar Center drum offs?
Um, I think that John and Daniel were always interested in increasing the visibility of Orange County Drum. And I think that they were always pleased and proud to see Orange County Drum in so many places that they looked. And so when I think about Guitar Center and when I think about Drum Off, I think that in a way that's just sort of an extension of what the Warp Tour was. I think that to them, it's just one more avenue for that logo to be ubiquitous and for it to be universally recognizable and for it to represent quality drums and for it to represent the cutting edge and for it to represent really good drummers and really good bands. So I think that they recognized the opportunity to be able to continue to highlight the popularity of OCDP.
Yeah, totally. And do you think that Guitar Center, when that partnership between them happened, do you think it was because of, what I mean, the drum offs, or that they had already had a past relationship?
A little bit of both. I think with Guitar Center, I think that they uh, like like John and Daniel. I think Guitar Center recognized the popularity of No Doubt and Blink 182. And I think that some of that has to do with the fact that Guitar Center, was aware of their clientele at the time. If you think back to those times, that's when Zildjian put out like the pitch black cymbals and Travis was endorsing those. And that's when they put out like the signature Zildjian stick bags and stuff like that. The stuff that was branded for Adrian Young and Trey Cool um, and Travis and stuff like that. And so I just feel like with all of those other things already in the stores, and with Travis's white sticks, I mean those are still around. And when those things hit Guitar Center, I mean there were people probably like you, Travis fans, going into Guitar Center saying, "I want that stick bag. I want that practice pad. I want those cymbals. I want that stick bag. I want those sticks." That kind of stuff. I think that Guitar Center saw an opportunity to be able to capitalize on the popularity of what that was. I also think that Guitar Center, not a lot of people talk about this, but I also think that Guitar Center had some power and some leverage from the standpoint that that was when the Orange County Throne was born. That's when the Orange County hardware was born, where like they were able to like dip into manufacturing sites that were able to like brand a hi hat stand with that logo, and a throne with that logo. I think that everybody saw value in that. Everybody saw growth opportunity and a revenue stream in that. So some of that was just business acumen and ingenuity. Some of that was everybody saw an opportunity to widen their revenue stream. I don't blame them for that.
Yeah, I mean, ignoring the fact you called me a Travis fan, um, um,
Hold up, hang on. Now, oh yeah, but now between the two of us, you have four Travis kits sitting behind you. I have zero.
yeah, that's true. It's also, I mean, you and I have discussed this before. It's if you, and to me, it wasn't necessarily, obviously, Enema of the State changed a lot of people's lives. It's kind of like you think of Ludwig with Ringo or or
Yo,
Bonham,
yeah.
those guys, are in their,
Yep.
70s still talking about it and collecting those drums. It's kind of just the
Yep.
same thing. Travis had some of the most iconic drums. It's almost like how can you not, you know what I mean? Like you immediately know just by looking at it behind me. Some people even ask me, you're like, are they his? Like, no, they're replicas, but it's just that I don't know how else to describe it.
Well, and I will say this, and I wasn't poking fun at you. In my time there, again, keeping in mind that I was one of the older guys, here's what that means. That means that I was on the path of listening to other bands while I was there, and everyone hated that. Reason number 544 why I wore this shirt. No, but while I was working there and being the older guy, that wasn't a genre like the whole pop punk thing wasn't something that had really hit my radar. And so because I was sort of less familiar with it, I'll say, like Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, I think that record came out, I would say within the first, I'll say 6 months of me working there. I mean, that's around the time. I don't remember correct me if I'm wrong, but year wise, I think that's about right.
Yeah,
And
2001.
okay, right. So I am right. So here's what I remember. You're exactly right. I have often said that Travis is a lot like Ringo from the standpoint that Ringo back in the day, Ringo did two things to all the drummers that fell in love with him back then. Number one, he invented like drumming is cool. You should want to be like me. And the other thing that he invented, and this is the truth, you can Google it, like back orders didn't exist before Ringo Starr. Before the Ed Sullivan show, it's just like, those companies got inundated with requests for their musical instruments. And so that is very true about our relationship with Travis, Travis's relationship with drummers and Orange County Drum, because not only was he looked to be, to be cool, and he was cool, he is cool, but also because of the band's popularity. I mean, the number of replica kits we made is astounding. And what that did to our kit order book and our snare order book is bonkers. And that's Travis. Travis was always, Midas. Everything he touched turned to gold almost. That's the time when he started Famous Stars and Straps, and like, I mean, all that stuff. All that stuff coincided and only made that coolness factor bigger and more visible and more obvious to everybody around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also like you said, a generational thing. Like, I know the Beatles. I can't say I'm the biggest fan of them, kind of, you know what I mean, but I can appreciate them. It's the same kind of thing. Like that the Blink-182 was like our generation, well, me,
Oh yeah.
was our Beatles, Like like
Oh
your
yeah.
age, like Rush, as you know what I mean, and things like that. That's just it's a moment in time. Like unless you were there, you don't understand it.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that I grew to really appreciate about Travis back then was it would also be different if the guy that was really popular, like Travis, was just sort of like a middle of the road drummer. I like there are plenty of those drummers out there that are just really solid, like good drummers. The thing that I learned really quickly about Travis is, wow, that dude is insanely talented. His hand speed, his foot speed, his creativity, like the guy's a beast. He's an animal. So it was cool to be able to associate ourselves and what we did with him and his popularity, because that gets linked to all of the millions of albums that were sold and all the shows and his great drumming and all that stuff. It's like I think that respectfully, pop punk drumming could be really monotonous and boring. It could be, but it isn't. And what he did was never monotonous and boring. It was always cutting edge. It was always creative. He was always interested in utilizing like, different tones. I mean, he's probably one of the first people I ever saw to use one of those woodblock things that we made for the hoop of his bass drum. He's one of the first people that I saw that used like a ribbon crasher. He's one of the first guys I ever saw use a small little popper, little side snare, like mounted on a gogger floating thing with little vents. He was one of the first. I mean, I can't begin to count how many acrylic kits we made for him. And he was just, he was always willing to like really push the envelope in almost every way. And so it was cool to be associated with someone that had a lot of ingenuity and had a lot of ideas and constantly wanted to sort of push that forward.
Yeah, and like you said, he's so creative and his kits are so iconic, and you guys made so many replicas. I think people also don't understand. You guys also made a wide array of like just modest drums as well, in like traditional sizes, colors, and I
Oh
think that
yeah.
gets overlooked a lot.
I do too. I also think, you'd be surprised how many kits we made for guys that were just basic kits, and even kits for guys that were associated with other companies. I remember we made a kit for David Silveria back in the day. He was a Tama guy. We made a kit for Abe Cunningham from Deftones. He was with Orange County, and then I'm pretty sure, isn't he like a Tama guy? Like,
Yeah.
we made a snare drum for Tommy Lee. Like, I could go on and on and on and on and on about, a lot of that has to do with Daniel. Daniel would be out there on the road and on tour, and making connections and relationships with a lot of these guys. And a lot of these guys would see Travis play, and all of them would be blown away by like, oh my god, that snare drum, or oh my god, that kid, or whatever. And we ended up making lots of that type of stuff for a lot of those. Like, I remember Wes Borland, the guitar player from Limp Bizkit, had his own band called Big Dumb Face. And his drummer, I don't remember his drummer's name off the top of my head, forgive me, but yeah, it's like we made a whole Orange County kit for him. And Wes like did like finger painting, like oil painted finger paint, like on all the shells. And like it gave people a real, like, I don't know. It's almost like a trophy. People wanted to have that stuff. Earlier in this podcast, I mentioned the Pad Corporation being a Japanese company that used to come in and just buy a gang of drums from our from from the NAM booth. Dude, for that company, what we did more than anything else is we made snare drums. And the reason why we made snare drums is because what I learned back then was, well, the population of like Tokyo, let's say, a lot of those folks have smaller apartments, not a lot of space, whatever. And so what they wanted is they wanted literally like a snare drum, like as a conversation piece, like as something that was like on their mantle, like, oh, like it almost acted as like a display, like it almost acted as like a conversation piece, as a crown jewel. And back then, it's like they spared no expense. It's like Pad Corporation would order these things, and I'm like, they want what? And you'd make these things, and they were works of art, man. But to your point, yeah, we made a lot of, silver sparkle kits and white Formica kits, black, flat black kits. I mean, we did so much just everyday run of the mill. And it's funny, most of what we've talked about so far are wraps. Dude, you know how many just natural wood kits we made? How many kits we had painted? How many, like, it was unbelievable. I mean, I talked mostly about the wrapping kits because that's kind of my world and that's what I was working on a lot of. Dude, I definitely assembled a lot of super unique, super sexy kits that weren't wrap either, and that weren't zany, weird, outlandish, crazy, unique things.
Yeah, it's also, I feel like with the county or like Orange County being the company that they were, it's like you almost felt like you kind of had to go big because the options were
Oh yeah.
so did you also notice that when like you built your own drums that it felt like, you kind of had to be a little bit more creative, or were you like, oh, just kind of.
Yeah, I don't know if I wanted, when I built my own stuff, I don't know if I wanted to be really creative, but I know I wanted to lean into the fact that I had access to the best, like the best guys, the best, materials, the best, all that sort of stuff. So the stuff that I worked on for me, I think I was more focused, kind of like John and Daniel. I was more focused on it being the best it could be, sound the best it could be, look rad too, but be undeniably top notch. I think I was more interested in that personally.
Good time for me to mention. Corey's gonna stick around, and we're gonna dive into our Patreon where he's gonna talk about more about his personal kits and kits that he would have made. And if you haven't already subscribed, please head over to Patreon, and Corey is gonna give you a full scoop of what we got going on. Kind of coming to the end here. When did you leave OCDP?
I left in the summer of 2004, if I'm not mistaken.
Why did you leave?
I hated it. No,
Like, did you see the writing
no,
on the
I
wall,
was
or was it just
no. I do. It's funny that you just said that. Did I see the writing on the wall? Yeah. Um, I suppose the Guitar Center acquisition, I didn't really know how that was going to impact Orange County Drum or my position at Orange County Drum, or like, not to sound, too doomsday-ish or whatever, but like, I didn't know if there was going to be machines that did, like, I didn't know if they were going to move the manufacturing facility to Oxnard, or you know what I mean. Like, I definitely think that there were questions that were associated with the Guitar Center acquisition of OCDP. However, the other reason why I left was, I felt strongly about, um, finding a job that had more room for like upward mobility, maybe more of a structure with medical benefits and stuff like that. So I would say that, during this conversation, I've joked about the fact that I was one of the older guys at Orange County Drum, which is true. But I think one of the other things that meant for me was that I wasn't living at home. I didn't have the benefit. And I'm not saying all of those guys did. I'm just saying some of those guys had a different relationship with finances and money and making ends meet than I did, as proven by the fact that I was there every Saturday. You know what I'm saying? It's like I was down because I needed to make money. So I was interested in pursuing something, that maybe provided me a little bit more upward mobility and structure. And at that time, I had been offered an opportunity to test with Orange County Sheriff's Department. And I went through all the testing and all the interviewing and all that sort of stuff. And I ultimately chose to turn that down. I ultimately chose not to pursue that path. But at the time, I was pursuing that path, and I was doing Orange County Drum. And I had a conversation with John one day because John knew that I was testing and stuff like that. I had missed a couple of Saturdays because of that. And John had said to me, months and months before I left, he's just like, you know what? You would make an excellent cop. And I was like, oh, well, thank you. Like, I appreciate that. So that was something that interested me at the time. And like I said, I ended up not pursuing that career path. But at the time, John recognized that it was going to be tough for me to do both. So at that time, we mutually agreed that I was going to part ways with Orange County Drum and pursue a different career path.
It's totally cool that you left on good terms, and that it was encouraged. It wasn't oh well, Corey's leaving. You know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
yeah. Um, Circling back to the Guitar Center stuff. You said business, it kind of made sense to do, and they wanted to give a bigger reach with Guitar Center. How did you feel when you saw the assembly line, or the production snares that were still made in the USA coming through?
I have mixed feelings about those products that were manufactured then. I was part of the staff who built that first kind of wave that we were sending to Guitar Center. And looking back on that, I think the thing that I think I was bummed out about, I think that's right around the time, shortly after the time where we had established the sharp tooth lug. We weren't using the little square lugs anymore, and I remember things were sort of changing, and I don't remember how many snare drums we had to make for Guitar Center. It was a lot, but I remember just feeling like, we made like whatever 20 of this one and 20 of that one and 20 of that one, and I just sort of, it to me it felt less, I don't know what the word is, a boutique. It felt less custom. It felt less boutique. It felt less special. And in reality, it was less special. It was less boutique. It was less custom. Like, just that's just a fact. And so I remember having, I remember seeing the stacks of boxes. I remember when we got that box order. I remember like looking over at Jeremy, like what's with the pallets of boxes? Like, what are we doing? It's like it felt like I worked at FedEx or something. Like it was bonkers. And I mean, I remember watching two guys, Nick and Dean, like literally build boxes for days, and I was just like, oh my god. So I definitely remember my feelings changing a little around those times. And then you mentioned a minute ago that I left on good terms. I did. I went back to the shop, I don't know, a handful of times after I left. And John's brother, um, is the guy who's responsible for creating a lot of the really unique one-off machines that they used, like their 50-ton ram, the thing that pressed shells together to make 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 ply snare drums. His brother invented that thing, and it was crazy. And he had uh, he had built pneumatic stations in the front of the old building, where like all the tools were pneumatic, like all the ratchets, all of the Allen heads, all of like everything, and they were all like, it looked like it looked like you were in Star Trek. Like all those things like sort of came down from like the roof, like on those coiled up like pneumatic lines. And I remember walking in going like, what? Like, are we building androids? Like, what is happening? Like, I remember being really like, wow, this looks really different. And on one hand, I could see, well, that's going to increase efficiency. Like, those are way more efficient than the stuff that we used. And on the other hand, I was just like, huh, like, that's different. So then when I first started to see them like at Guitar Center, the very first thing I thought, just to be transparent, I was like, those triangular badges are dumb. Like that's the very first thing I thought of. When I saw the triangular badge, I was like, no, that ain't it. Like that bugged me a little bit, but that's just me being a jackass. So it is what it is.
I mean, from like my perspective, it was one of those things where it felt, it was like you know, didn't know how I felt about it either. Yes, I could now possibly afford, in Orange County, like many others that couldn't at a younger age, or you know what I mean? Like it's something that could now be obtainable, but at the same time, you think Orange County had, like you said in the very beginning, a vibe, and then I think Guitar Center, corporate kind of, like sellout in a way. You're kind of like, yeah, but
Yeah.
it's not the same. You know what I mean? Like you were kind of doing this thing, teetering on the scale, like, it's cool. Like, when they came out with the like their versions, I think they made like 500 of like the all white one or like the all red Adrian. You're like, oh, they're so cool.
Yep.
But it's not really individual, like, or, it's just like everybody else has one. You're kind of just like a pearl drum set to me now. You know what I mean?
Well, and I just want to add to that. I'll say this. I feel exactly the same way as what you said, and I'm going to say right now, like trying to make them more affordable and having other people have access to them. I'm in favor of that, and I hope that more people get to like enjoy these instruments and all of that. When I compare that to like how it used to be, I mean, I commented about like the triangular badge or whatever, but like one of the things that I thought of was, and you're right, like I started to really question like the individuality, or the customness of all of that sort of stuff. And so I remember I even asked somebody, I think when they were explaining the acquisition to us, I think I don't remember who I asked, but I think I suggested like, oh, this is like what pork pie does. And everybody was just like, no, This is not like what pork pie does, because Bill Datamore, and I'm friends with Bill Datamore. Orange County was always totally cool with pork pie. By the way, there's a rumor out there that we didn't like each other. That is complete and utter bullshit. Um, they used to, I mean, Bill always used to send us. The first places his thrones ever landed was Orange County Drum. And every single one of us always sat on one of his thrones when we were building drums, and that's the truth. But anyway, so when they were talking about the acquisition, I'm like, oh, this is like pork pie. Because I remembered, like, oh, I've seen pork pie snare drums in Guitar Center. And so when I brought it up, like I thought those two things were analogous, everybody was just like, no, because Bill and his crew still make those, still send them onesie twosie. Like, they definitely ramped up their production, but not much changed from what I understand, from what Bill has said to me about pork pie. And when you start to like fast forward the tape here and you look at Orange County, like a lot of the production and a lot of that other stuff changed hands when Guitar Center finally got their meat hooks all the way into it. I'm not talking crap on them. I'm just saying, like, I recognize that, the drums that you're going in to buy at Guitar Center didn't come out of a little shop in Santa Ana, California. Like that's not that. Whereas, although Bill has moved into a larger facility due to the popularity of pork pie, having nothing to do with Guitar Center, I assume, um, it's still them doing the thing. And his motto, um, about, custom drums made by these American hands. Like his ad was always cool. It was always very true. And Bill is still, he's a real one, man. Like he's still one of the guys doing it the old school way. And I have admiration for that. So when you ask me about how I feel about the Guitar Center acquisition, I have mixed feelings about it as it relates to Orange County Drum, because there was a bit of a changing of the guard there. And, that happens. It is what it is.
It's funny you mentioned Bill. We're actually going to have him on because for those who don't know, he's tied into this history of in the story of Orange County in
Yeah.
the later part. So for anyone listening, stay tuned. We're definitely gonna have Bill on. But that's cool that you guys were actually like, same thing, much like the music scene. You guys were all cool, all tight. You know what I mean? Really, really cool.
Yep. Yep.
When they,
Great guy.
yeah, totally. He seemed super excited to do it. When you said they explained the acquisition to you, how did they explain it?
I think it was one day we were all in the shop. It was probably around lunch, and I literally think that we were all just sort of gathered around, munching on whatever we were eating for lunch that day. And I think John just sort of came into the shop, as he would regularly do, just to sort of address the crew and whatever. Whether he would come out just to sort of shoot the breeze or boost morale or tell a joke or screw around or whatever. And sometimes he would come out into the shop with some pertinent bulletin board material, and that was what this was. He sort of explained that they had been offered an opportunity that they thought was too good to pass up, and that they were going to take advantage of that opportunity, and that in these early stages they weren't really sure what that was going to look like in the near future. And that proved to be pretty true. I mean, how he couched that made sense and still makes sense to me now, because I can understand that an acquisition like that isn't easy. And I think there's oftentimes several questions that immediately follow taking an opportunity like that. So I can't imagine what that must have felt like to him. I think I wonder back then if he felt as though, if it felt like he was going to win the lottery. Like, I mean, I don't know what any of the numbers are. So looking back on it, I don't know. There are some indicators that it wasn't as profitable or lucrative a deal as anyone thought that it would have been, but that's not for me to say, and I don't know the specifics there. But I wonder back in the day if it's something where John finally thought his ship had come in. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. When looking back, when the custom shop closed, what do you think could have saved the company?
Wow, that's a really hard question. Well, I think only two things would have saved the shop. The first one would have been um, no acquisition by Guitar Center. And I know that maybe that feels like I'm blaming them for the end of Orange County. That's not true. That's not what I'm doing. I'm referencing the vibe. I'm referencing the boutique custom um, ness of what we provided. I think that piece would have been preserved if Guitar Center wouldn't have gotten involved. Do I think that would have saved the company? I guess it had a chance to save the company. And then the second thing that I think could have saved the company, I guess, would be if the acquisition was more like Guitar Center's relationship with Pork Pie, or when Zildjian bought Vic Firth, they did that not with the intention of changing anything or putting their stamp on anything or putting their hands anywhere or sticking their nose where it didn't belong. It was an acquisition for acquisition's sake. You know, it's like Zildjian was just like, we really like how you do stuff. You're now under our umbrella. Just keep doing the stuff that you were doing the way that you were doing it. Don't change anything. We're going to probably shave down our corporate structure a little, and everybody might have different benefits, and the name on their check might be a little bit different, but for the most part, you know, you're under this umbrella, but you're still you. So I think that either one of those two scenarios might have I don't know, continued to sort of breathe life into what Orange County was back then. I think that's I don't know, that's a pretty adult answer.
Yeah, I think the timing of it too, with the recession, the housing market crashing, and just timing and things that you just can't necessarily control when it comes to business. I feel like, that I'm sure that didn't help either.
Yeah, and I will just say this too. Sadly, if Orange County would have kept going the way it was going, and if Guitar Center wouldn't have gotten involved or would have gotten involved in a different way, like I just described, and if Orange County could have navigated the recession, the housing market, like all that stuff that you just mentioned, I actually believe that Orange County would be bigger today than it was back then because of social media. I think that once things like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and live streaming and GoPro cameras and all that sort of stuff, I think that once that stuff it was a reality, I think that it would have just sent the popularity of Orange County Drum through the roof. I do. I truly do.
Yeah, I guess I never really looked at it like that. I mean, they're more popular than ever. Things are listed and sold in under an hour. It feels like now. If you find something in the used market, I mean, people are still talking about them. They're always brought up. I know a lot of old artists still use them in recordings. So yeah, I kind of, now you say it, I do think it would still be around. I mean, also this era.
And as it relates to and as it relates to selling stuff, I think part of the reason why that stuff sells so quickly for the prices that it does is because everybody knows that it's not a renewable resource. Like everybody knows that these things exist, and for all intents and purposes, not to be Debbie Downer here, but they're never going to exist again. Like, you know, Orange County isn't going to crank out a tiger fur kit out of the Santa Ana shop anytime in the next, you know, I mean, I hope I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but God, it sure doesn't feel like that's going to happen.
If, say, Orange County was to open, say they somehow, you know, open the shop again and start taking custom orders, do you think that they can capture that lightning in a bottle again, or that vibe?
Man, I don't know. I think from the visibility standpoint, like as it relates to somebody like Adrian or Travis, I think that people like that have the power and the visibility and the platform and the popularity to be able to call attention to something like that and to be able to start that fire and fan that flame. So, from the visibility perspective and from the popularity perspective, I think that there are some forces at play out there that could really sort of reignite this whole thing. I have to be honest though, from the perspective of the actual labor, I don't know how to answer your question. And the biggest reason why I don't know how to answer your question is the three people that I know, the three people that I know are so well equipped and knowledgeable and experienced to actually physically do it. I don't think that any of them are, I mean, let's just cut to the chase. Jeremy Berman is the top of the triangle. He has sadly passed away, and we all miss him very much. He was very much the heartbeat of a lot of what went on at Orange County Drum, and was certainly one of the arbiters of quality control. You know, he was the mouthpiece of Daniel from the standpoint that he was the one driving home how flawless and rad and perfect and awesome things needed to be. So he's no longer with us. So that's one piece off the board. Max is another one who has that acumen, that ability. And since Orange County has gone away, you know, he's started to make his own custom wooden furniture and whatnot. He's become a real craftsman, and he's really leaning into that way of life and providing for his family. And he's excellent at what he does. That said, do I think that he would walk that back to sweat it out and make drums? The answer to that question is I don't know. And the third part of that is Mike Kelly. Mike Kelly is another guy, like Daniel and like Max and like Jeremy, who is experienced doing all that stuff and who believes in things being absolutely picture perfect and doing things to the best of your ability. And now that Mike lives in Texas and has started Kelly Drums, I don't think that he would be the guy to that would be willing to reinvigorate Orange County Drum, you know. And thankfully for us, there are some of those people left in this world, like Mike, who are doing things using all of those old school Orange County Drum methods. And it's why his stuff sounds incredible. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. That's a tough one. There's two sides to that coin, and that's a tough one.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one of those things. I just don't know if, you know, a good example I looked at it would be everyone talks about Dark Side of the Moon, that, you know, such an iconic record, and they can't stand each other. And that was kind of the end of it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you can get
Yeah.
those guys in that same room, in that same shop to do that again, you know?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And it's not for lack of love. Like all of us are, most of us are still in touch. We all have a pretty good relationship. Each of us, you know, we could reach out. I could text any one of those guys, totally out of the blue, and it's like we are all, you know, like a brotherhood. You know, you know, the 15 of us that were working back there back then. I mean, yeah, it's remarkable how good the our reputation is amongst each other, and how good our relationship is amongst us. If any of us was in trouble, and if any of us needed help, and you know, any of the rest of us could chip in and be of service, we love each other.
Right. All right, man. You've neared the end. This is the final one we're gonna leave our listeners with. Are you ready for it?
Yes, I
Did
am.
you understand at the time that you were part of what was going to become a legacy in the drum world?
No, I didn't understand the depth or the magnitude of what I was stepping into. Um, and honestly, I came into it in a really weird way. You know, it's like I arrived for my job interview in a suit and tie, expecting to find a facility the size of DW. Because I lived in Arizona, because this is pre-internet, and because I read it in the liner notes of a 311 album, I didn't really know what to expect, other than my brain was just like, well, these are the raddest drums ever. These things sound incredible and whatever. And I just expected, I think my expectations were to see something far grander than what I found. And then when I got a job there and I realized that I was, you know, just one of these sawdust, sweaty 15 dudes, grinding it out 6 days a week to, build screws and sand drums and cut this and edge that and sand that and polish this and wrap that and box this up. Like, it just sort of felt like, I don't know, it felt like busy work. But I think my advantage was I had just moved to California. So when I got there, I was just like, oh, I immediately have 15 friends. Like, I'm immediately in this place, in this brotherhood where we were all thick as thieves. And so I moved to California in October of 2001. So to answer your question, I didn't have much of an idea for how big this was going to be. But just a few months later, that first NAMM show, I definitely got my first taste of like, oh, got it. Oh, we're like royalty. Oh, okay. And what I understood then was how much respect and admiration Orange County Drum as an entity had from all of the other players in the drumming community. So that part I understood really quickly. But no, I didn't fully grasp like how absolutely massive it was going to be. Dude, you have a podcast called the Fully Vented Pod. Like, we're talking decades later about the brand of drums that sits behind you and the banner that sits behind you. Like, no, there's no possible way that you could have said to me like, hey, in 2025 you're going to be on a podcast talking about Orange County Drum, and I'd have been like, what's a podcast? Like, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. And I just want to say right now, congratulations to you. I want to give you your flowers for a second. Like, it's so
thanks, man.
awesome that you've created a podcast dedicated to this, because what I've said since day one, I've said this for a long time, you cannot tell the story of drums without including a chapter on Orange County Drum. Like, you can't do it. You can't. We are in the same conversation as Ludwig and Rogers and Slingerland. Like, we are. And that's that.
Yeah, I've said before, love them or hate them, like you can't deny the impact that Orange County has had, for drummers, for music, and just in general. Like, it's something that just can't be ignored. So that's why we're, like gentlemen like yourself, taking the time to tell us your story, man. We just want to share it. And I'm going to leave everybody with that. Corey, thank you so much for taking the time to, go down memory lane. This has been awesome. And everybody, if they could just stick around, sign up for our Patreon. We've got more. Corey's going to stick around and we're going to pick his noggin some more. So guys, feel free to head over there. And lastly, where can people find you?
Social media is always just my name, Corey Manske. So it's at CoreyManske. I'm easy to find.
All right, right on. Well, Corey, again, thank you, man. And it's been real. And we'll be in touch.
Cool.
That wraps up our chat with Corey Manske. From sanding shells to shaping iconic O.C.D.P kits, this story is proof that passion and persistence can leave a lasting mark. Catch the bonus segment with Corey, available now on our Patreon, along with ad-free episodes and exclusive extras. Thanks for listening to the Fully Vented Podcast.